Hello, my name is Pastor Eric Shafer, and this is Hope Matters. Hope Matters is a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church here in Santa Monica, California. And each week we talk to an interesting person from around the community and also around the nation and around the world about the theme of hope, because we believe that hope matters. My guest this week is the Reverend Peter Panagore, who I have known now for 20 some years, I suspect. And he is a United Church of Christ pastor. He is a radio and television personality. He produces children's television, and he is a multiple book writer. And I don't know, probably, Peter, I left off a few things, husband, father, grandfather, all those things too. But anyway, Peter, it's good to see you, and thank you for being on Hope Matters.
Thank you, Eric. It's so good to see your face, so good to hear your voice, and thanks for having me here.
Good. So, Peter, these days, when I first got to know you, you were working on a radio and television ministry that crossed the state of Maine and had a long, storied history, informally known as Daily Devotions, First Radio Parish of Maine, or something like that. And of course, that came to an end, as many of these things do, a few years ago. I remember visiting you in the television studio and there in your studio at home. So let our viewers know a little bit about what's happened since that all changed for you.
Well, it ended with a heart attack just before the show ended, and that was quite the personal change, because I know we're going to talk about hope, Eric, but I died for a second time in my life during that whole closing. And since that point, because my life was disrupted after 15 years on TV, the show had lasted 91 years, started on AM radio. I was the fifth minister. I was very honored and blessed to be able to have this great job. New corporate owners came in and purchased the station, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. So I started writing a third book. I started looking for church work. I decided that I didn't want to go back in the church, that I wanted to start my own thing. And so I've started up a YouTube channel called Not Church. And I'm sold my second book, my Audible bestseller, for a film right over there in California and downtown Hollywood. And we're in pre-development. Oh, no, not pre-development. We're in development. We've been for about a year now. We've been working hard on it. So I've been working hard on that. I've been working on Not Church, teaching mysticism on a global scale, counseling mystics and near-death experiencers, and talking about mysticism in the Bible and elsewhere, and the broad global religious literature.
Wow, that's a mouthful, and that's a lot of things going. And so you have so your newest book is what?
Well, it is untitled at the moment. It is tentatively titled Heaven Is. And what it is it's two things at once. It's the background story for the movie, and it's also the beginning of the telling of the truer origin of my mystical life that started when I was 5 or 6 years old, and that my first near-death experience when I was 21 was a major part of, but definitely not the only thing. And the point of the book is to help individual members of congregations and churches in particular, but not exclusively so, people who have had mystical experiences and yet can't find a place to speak about them because they are taboo. And such a thing might be as common as a visitation from the dead of a deceased loved one who communicates directly to a person wellness, love, forgiveness, acceptance, whatever the message is. It's all telepathic and direct and divine, and it results in a changed faith. It often moves a person from belief into faith. It's a very powerful experience. It's just one type. And so mysticism has long been my forte, and it's what I continue to work in.
Wonderful. And mysticism is not new in the Christian church. It was very much part of the early Christian, what they call the Christian fathers. Correct, Peter? That's a long history of mysticism in the
Yeah,
church.
it runs right up until today. It runs right through the Middle Ages, right through the 1800s, runs right into the United States. Thomas Merton, maybe one of America's most famous Catholic. I'd toss Richard Rohr into my hat there, and Matthew Fox for contemporary Christians. Um, uh, but the shelves are full of these writers that go back centuries, and the books last. These books are still in print after hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years, some of them, because of the value of the material in them. And what really sets them apart from it's not theology, it's direct divine experience that then is interpreted through the experiencer, through the context of their religion, their culture, their time in the world, their place in the world, and it develops language around it. For instance, Meister Eckhart, or the Cloud of Unknowing, or Teresa of Avila, or Saint Francis of Assisi. All these people were mystics, and mystics were kind of tossed out after the age of enlightenment began. Uh, but they sort of threw out the baby with the bathwater there. The mysticism is the foundation of every religion in the world. Someone had a direct divine experience. And it's so common, Eric, that so after immediately what happened after First Radio Parish closed, uh, I embarked on a New England wide preaching tour. And so every Sunday for almost 2 years rather, I preached somewhere else. And I was always being invited because I was a pretty famous person in New England. And I was available, and pulpits were empty. So I went and I spoke, and I always quizzed the congregation. I always asked, I came to talk about near death experience, my own. But I always asked, who here has ever had a mystical experience? And nobody would raise their hand. And then I'd say, here's a definition. uh, William James, Varieties of Religious Experience from Harvard. It's transitory, it has beginning and an end. It's passive, it happens to you, you don't make it happen. It's noetic, it's wisdom, it's ineffable. The wisdom you gain is ineffable. It's unspeakable. It lodges in your soul. You know that you're changed as a result, but when you speak about it, it sounds weak and ineffectual. And then I said, so who here's ever been visited by someone they loved after they died? And nobody would raise their hand, Eric. And then I'd raise my hand, and then pretty soon, 50% of every congregation had their hand up. Every congregation I went to, some as high as 70%. And I would include things like, who's ever had an angel encounter. The angel took the wheel and you didn't crash the car, or some other miraculous speaking inside you, or telling you not to do this thing, or Jesus came to you, or you had an out of body experience, or a dream vision, any number of things. And often 70% of the congregation would raise their hand. Who here's ever talked about it? Nobody. Nobody in any congregation ever spoke about it, because it is so taboo that people in churches can't talk about the one thing that matters to them the most of all in their faith life, that gives them the most hope for eternal life, is the one thing they're not allowed to talk about. And so the purpose of this book is I'm in the same way that I came out of the closet as a near-death experiencer because of you, Eric. Okay, you at Odyssey Networks, and Mary and Nick, and what in the way you talked to me about it, encouraged me and strengthened me. Really, seriously, you guys, I know that this is not hyperbole to say this, Eric, that it's because of Odyssey Networks and you in particular, along with Nick and Mary, that launched me into a global-sized career as a public speaker, bringing the truth of near-death experience to a global culture. It's an Audible bestseller now, and I never would have written it without your support. And
Thank
so
you
I
for
just
that.
wanted to say that, okay?
Well, that's lovely of you to say. I think you're giving me more credit than I deserve, but I have always supported your work and this part of your work. So do you have a copy of that book that you can hold
Uh,
up?
I do.
I figured you might.
I do right there. There it is.
Heaven is Beautiful, and it's available on Amazon and where else, Peter?
Everywhere around the world. You name it, you can get it. Barnes and Noble too, and all sorts of bookstores all over the world, and even some still now 5 years later in some indie stores here and there as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Libraries, it's also in libraries everywhere.
and you can order all my book authors say, tell people to order it through their local bookstore, because rather than
Yeah, that's
Amazon.
right.
But Amazon's another way, and it gets books to people that are isolated, so we don't.
Oh yeah, Amazon's great, and for all
So
that.
fine, that's just wonderful. Um, you have other interests. You have a lot of interests, and I know that. You and I were kicking around this children's program you were wanting to do, and I, and you have a lot of interest in reaching children with the love of God. Anything on that in that front going on these days?
Well, we're on a hiatus with it. I came this close twice to selling it to major distributors in the past 4 years. But it has not sold yet. And as a result of the movie that I'm making, its potential to be sold once the movie is done to the very same people that I'm working with now is a possibility. And it may be the same, maybe a little different, but they're definitely interested because we want to reach children with the truth of the divine love, with God's love. But I tend, as you know from daily devotions, I was a softball player in terms of packaging. And so the children's program was never going to mention God. It was not going to be a religious program at all, but it was going to imbue all and embody all the difficulties of real life that kids face along with the beauty of and strength of love and hope.
All right. So you still got a bunch of balls in the air. If people wanted to keep up with you, do you have your own website, Peter?
Yes, I do. peterpanagore.love. peterpanagore.love. And what I can probably do is rename myself so that that's right there for
Sure,
them to
do that.
see.
That'd be great. So if people want to keep up with that, and if they go there, they can find out about when the movie might be coming out too.
Sure, it's in development where I'm in my third draft of this book that I just mentioned, and it's going to be entered. It's going to be a part of this movie, working as a reflection, as a setup for my near-death experience, which is not in my book, because there's a lot of things that happened before I died that prepared me for that event, and I didn't know it when they were happening. It's the only kind of thing that you can see in hindsight. Oh, that's what that was, huh? And so we're going to kind of weave that into the book to give it a stronger movie cinematic buildup. So
Wonderful.
it'll probably be another year before you're going to see it on a screen somewhere.
Okay, okay, good. So you want to know more about Peter's near-death experience, his first near-death experience, which occurred, as you heard, when he was a very young adult. You can find out that in at peterpanagore.love. You can also find that out from the book that he held up, Heaven is Beautiful, and that experience. But that would be the course of another whole interview, Peter. But why don't you say a little bit about that experience, if you could? Give us the elevator speech on your near death experience.
All right, I a college student, 21 years old, ice climbing in Banff Provincial Park in Western Canada in March, made a miscalculation in my equipment. I chose the wrong gear and it slowed our climb down significantly. So by the time we reached the top of the climb that March evening, uh, the sun went down and the temperature dropped and we were alone on the cliff. And essentially I froze to death. It was a long night getting to that point of trying to survive, uh, controlling my terror, being level headed, trying to make good choices with a brain that was actually freezing along with every other part of me. And in the end, sometime before dawn, when the rope was finally stuck in a way that we could not retrieve it, and we knew we were dead. We'd been dying all night, and our hypothermia had advanced to its final end stages. At that point, I recognized that my fight was over, and there was nothing I could do. And so I relaxed, and I became peaceful, and I started thinking about God and my family, and then the final thing that happened was I got what's called tunnel vision, which is the very last stage where your vision collapses into nothingness, usually into unconsciousness. But I did not go into unconsciousness. The strangest thing that happened is when it went black, I became conscious for the first time in my life. Suddenly, I was not asleep anymore. I was awake inside my body, but the mountain had disappeared and my eyes were open. And even though I knew my eyes were shut, I could see in a great distance of darkness, and way in the far distance, immensely distant. It's further than the furthest star than that you can see. There was a pinprick of light that came rushing at me and filled me and captured me and carried me into divine love, into a union of being, during which I went through uh, a judgment of my own. I judged myself for the causes, for the problems I had caused and the pains that I had caused. And I was forgiven and filled with beauty and love and truth, and a whole bunch of other stuff happened. And I got to choose to come home here to this body. And I misspoke just then, because my home is heaven now and always has been since I came home back to this body by choice. But it's not my home anymore.
Cool, cool. And, much of what you say is really, although it's put in the mysticism box, you know, Christians believe that heaven is here and yet to come. And so we don't always get the here part, do we?
No, and it is, and one of the after effects of near-death experience for me is although I know that the infinity of heaven is far greater love, a far greater love that I can ever express or experience here, times a trillion bazillion times greater than I can say. But I also can say that the divine presence, heaven is God, it's panentheism. God is inside of everything that there is, always larger than everything there is, larger than the universe, but everything in the universe is contained and radiates the divine love. When you look in a baby's eyes and you see the light inside them, or someone you love, or you watch someone die and you watch the light go out of their eyes, or you step out into nature, you go down to the beach in beautiful Santa Monica, and you stand on the beach and you look at the sunset and you feel the radiance of the divine light pouring through the sand to the soles of your feet. God is everywhere and everything. Heaven is here now. And Jesus came to tell us that heaven is within us. It's inside us right here, right now. It's among us, it's between us, but more particularly, he said in Luke, in the King James Version, if you make your eye single, your body will be filled with light. If you aim your heart at the oneness of being, at heaven above all things, you'll find heaven here because you find it inside yourself. And then you see it even inside your enemy. And so, even inside your enemy, you can love them even while you're fighting against them, but not with anger, but with you're still recognizing the love and the light inside them. And so, then you can't judge them. When you see the light of God inside yourself as equal to the light of God inside your enemy, there is no judgment. You might be hurt, you might not like what they're doing, but you can't judge their soul to hell. You can't.
All right. Thank you, Peter. That's great. At this point in the interviews, when people haven't talked about hope, we switch to the direct question, but you've really addressed it, as in your comments, but just say a word about what gives you hope today and the year 2021.
The divine light within me. That is always, that's my touchstone of hope in every single thing that I do. And what I see hope on a global scale for the first time in the history of the world now. Humanity, we're tribes, we're up against each other's shoulders, we're pushing on each other all the time. The climate is changing, the world's in turmoil as it always has been, but now there's just so many of us. But there's a huge difference going on now, Eric. Beginning in the 1950s, when cardiac care came online and then spread globally and improved over 50 years, the doctors started bringing people back from the dead. And there are tens of millions of us in the United States. In Europe and Africa, everywhere where there's cardiac care, there are near-death experiences by the millions. And we're now discovering whether or not we're all coming back with the same message of love. And so far, I can tell you, that's sure what it seems like. And so the hope for humanity that I have is that whether you're Christian or Jewish or Catholic or Zoroastrian or Jain or Sikh, it doesn't really matter so much because the divine love is far greater than all of our human divides.
Thank you, Peter. This has been Hope Matters, a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Santa Monica, California. I'm Pastor Eric Shafer, the senior pastor here at Mount Olive. Our guest this week has been the Reverend Peter Panagore, a noted author and radio and television personality who now has dedicated himself to just exploring the love of God within everyone. And thank you, Peter, for telling us about that today. You can find more about Peter and his work at peterpanagore.love. You can find more about his book, Heaven is Beautiful, there, and watch for his new movie. Thank you for being with us today, Peter.
Eric, I loved being here with you, and thank you everybody for having me.
You're welcome. This is Hope Matters. We believe that hope matters. We believe we have a God of hope. Thank you for being with us. Look forward to seeing you next week.